This month's theme is being for something and against nothing. When I shared this with a friend, she said, "Oh my gosh, it sounds like a country western song. Can you hum a few bars?" 2020 is a presidential election year. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we were indeed a united nation that had 2020 vision when it came to sorting out the facts and seeing the truth? It will be tough to be for one candidate and not against another. How many of you recently watched the portions of the impeachment hearings? How many of you have watched any of the Democratic debates? Now, in all honesty, was there anyone who saw any of that didn't either mentally or verbally say out loud, that Trump is guilty or not guilty, they're all off base, or that one candidate that is a Democrat was far better than the other, the rest can just get off the stage and leave? You were for something and against something. You see, it's a challenge to not pick sides. It's a challenge to not say, I'm right and you're wrong. In the 1980s, every summer my family would come together at a cabin my parents rented in Butte Meadows. And it didn't take one or two dinners very long for Dad and I to get into it. He was a lumberman. I was a park and recreation person. We had absolutely opposite perspectives of the environment. He believed in the right to life. I believed in a woman's right to choose. I worked in a HUD housing project that dealt with poverty, child abuse, and hunger. I believed in social responsibility. And as a Republican, he believed that it was, and my dad had survived the Depression, he believed in personal responsibility. Our list of differences seemed to be endless. One year, we were sitting there getting started all over again as the rest of the family looked on, and he said, enough is enough. We're never going to agree. We're not going to talk about this anymore. And the problems that we were discussing or sharing are political views, but rather we hoped that we could change each other's mind. And that, of course, was never going to happen. According to research, when in a difficult discussion with someone, a person will only change their mind 3 to 4% of the time. What Dad was for, I was against, and vice versa. We both would approach the discussion with lots of information and lots of logic. Of course, there was always just a pinch of emotion added in. Even if what we were saying was true, those who listened would hear more than the words that we were speaking. They would hear our emotions. Unfortunately, they don't know whether the emotion comes from love and concern or disdain and disrespect. So we share our perspective, we risk misunderstanding from the other person. And if we listen to ourselves before speaking out loud, we can judge our own hearts before words harm and hurt others. Cassandra Vinton indicates in her book, Resist, Goals and Tactics for Change Makers, that there are 3 change messages that need to be made by anyone. A third of that is information. Another third is how to make change. And the final third is a vision of the future. Information, change, future. As you enter this coming political year, what I would ask you to do is to watch the political candidates and watch the advertisements for the propositions and see if they use that formula when they're speaking or in their 30-minute ads. How often we pick sides because of fear, anger, or ignorance, or even money. I can remember in 1984 the Briggs ballot initiative that was on the ballot here in California, Proposition 64. If it had passed, anyone who was HIV positive or had AIDS would be put in a closed facility, and the only way they would ever get out of it was out of a cure. And we all knew that was never going to happen. It was based on the fear of the disease, the anger over gay men and drug addicts who were spreading this disease, ignorance about the disease, as well as the frustration that tax dollars were being spent to find a cure rather than on education or something else the individuals felt were important. Whenever we speak out of fear, anger, ignorance, or even what we say is true, those who listen will hear more than our words. Remember, I just said that. What they don't know is whether the emotions we're expressing come from love and concern or disdain and disrespect. So we risk being misunderstood. If we listen to ourselves before speaking out loud, we can judge our hearts before our words harm others. As you decide on who and what you will vote for in the coming year, take a serious look at your motives. Are they based on fear, anger, ignorance, frustration? Because you see, we tend to vote with our sentiment, not with our rational minds. That hooks into our fears, our angers, and our pocketbooks. And politicians and political marketeers know that all too well about us. Jonathan David Hart is an American social psychologist. He's a professor of ethical leadership at New York University's Stern School of Business. His main area of study are the psychology of morality and moral emotions. He indicates when you ask people moral questions, sometimes their responses are, and they scan their brain, and then their answers and brain activity patterns indicate that they reach a conscious decision quickly and produce their reasons later only to justify what they've decided. The problem isn't that people don't reason. They do reason. But their arguments aim to support their conclusions, not yours. Reason doesn't work like a judge or a teacher impartially weighing evidence or guiding us to a place of wisdom, but rather it works like a lawyer or a press secretary justifying your actions and the judgment of others. Hart, in a recent TED Talk presentation, shares how we are tribal people. Politics and sports are a way of playing war, something that goes back many generations. Regardless if we are politically right or left, the more we feel the same, the more we feel safe. When we don't feel safe, we are out of our comfort zone. And when we are uncomfortable, we demonize each other. Both sides are governed by negative partisanships and votes, and we vote against something, not for it. Remember being for something and against nothing? Both the left and the right see the other side as a threat to our country. I was stunned when Hart indicated that political prejudice is far worse in our country than racial prejudice, and I think that's pretty bad. And that, as a nation, we would need help to heal that deep wound. So just how do we heal this great divide that exists between the right and the blue? First, we have to stop living in negativity. Neuroscientist Rick Hansen indicates that we must consciously hold on to a positive thought for at least 15 seconds That's a minimum of 15 seconds for it to leave an impression in the neurons of our brain. You see, part of our problem is we're more attached to the problem than to the solution. Just go to work and listen to the gossip. You'll understand that. So let's do a little experiment today. What I'd like you to do is close your eyes, and I want you to select the opposite political party that you belong to. And I want you, for the next 15 seconds, to think only good thoughts about that political party. When I say go, or get ready, begin. Stop. How hard was that? Very hard. Did you come back to just one thought over and over and over again? Because that's all you could think of? You couldn't think of more than one thing? Huh? It's hard to focus on what's good about someone else. And it is time for us to come to a place of appreciation and gratitude for the political left and the political right. We must relinquish our negative thinking and stick with the positive, especially when it is something or someone it is easy to be negative about. Our pattern of relating, once established in childhood, basically determines how we respond to other people the rest of our entire life. For example, if we learned to be skeptical and suspicious, our perspective or focus will typically be narrow. If we learn to be hopeful and happy and trusting, then our focus typically expands. What did you learn as a child? Are you suspicious or are you trusting? Are you narrow or are you willing to expand? All of this will determine how you relate to others with different political views. I would ask, are you willing to change today? Next, we need to understand what truth really means. A couple of years ago, Kathy Ann Conway gave us a new way of looking at truth. She called it alternate facts. Ernest Holmes tells us the truth means God, spirit, reality. In a lesser sense, the word truth designates anything that is true: a psychological truth, a spiritual truth, a physical truth. Additionally, he wrote, "The truth is that which is really so, and God alone is truth." If truth is about our relationship with God, then when we disagree with someone, we are disagreeing with God, because we are one with each other and one with the divine. We are so polarized as a nation that we have forgotten our oneness with each other. We have skipped from truth to falsehood, and that serves our perspective, no one else's. And we've forgotten along the way that God loves things by uniting them, not by dividing or excluding them. And in politics, we exclude. Next, we need to let go of our fears. Fear is really all about survival. We're afraid of what we think will be taken away from us, or our livelihood. Will change the ethnicity of our town, or will force us to work on through our retirement, or that we won't be able to retire, or that there will be no health care for us when we get older, or that Social Security will dry up and be all done. Our fears seem so huge. And indeed, it is about our own personal survival. And so we vote based on our fears rather than what is truth and what is reality. If we want to be free of our fears, then we need to learn how to be at peace no matter what happens. Remember, you are a religious scientist. God is your source, not Social Security, not your home, not your community, not your car, but God. Fourth, we need to look at what we're thinking about. In Acts 9, we are told of the story of Saul, who ultimately became known as Paul. Remember, he was on the road to Damascus when a light shined all around him, and he fell to the ground, and he became blind, and he heard a voice. And he said, "Who are you, and why do you persecute me?" And the reply was, "I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you persecuted." Remember, Saul would hunt out the followers of Jesus, and then he'd turn them over to the high priests, who in turn would either kill them or punish them. Now, when Saul saw the light, he was blinded. And ultimately, Paul would describe his transformation as scales falling from his eyes so that he could once again see. Paul had one concept previously about Jesus and God. What he thought he knew was that his way of believing was the only right way. What he came to recognize was that Jesus was the Christ. And often in life, we think we know what is right. And then something happens, and we recognize there is truth in another perspective. Are you willing to hear another perspective? Only when we truly listen will we learn how another feels, believes, or thinks. Fifth, we must be willing to come together to problem solve. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a saying, an addict wants more and more and more of what's not working in their life. Richard Rohr, who I read earlier, the author of The Universal Christ, states oppositional energy only creates more of the same. As a nation, we must be willing to come together and create a bridge and a vision that will benefit all, not just half of the people or a select few. We must be willing to do what I call the 3 C's: cooperate, compromise, and change. If we continue to stand for only what we believe is right or what we think is the truth, then we will sink together in the quicksand, and then no one wins. Etta Helsum was a Jewish woman who was killed at Auschwitz in 1943. She was from Holland and born in 1940. Before she was imprisoned, she was quite a modern young lady and was highly spiritual. Her letters and diaries were published in 2002. Here is a woman who will soon die at Auschwitz, and yet she has an incredible sense of what is hers to do, as well as her relationship with God. Here's an excerpt from her diary, a writing to God. Alas, there doesn't seem to be much you yourself can do about our circumstances, about our lives. Neither do I hold you responsible. You cannot help us, but we must help you and defend your dwelling place inside us to the very last. Our political situation in America is not of God's making. It's of the making of our collective consciousness. And there is truly nothing that divine can do about our circumstances. It is all up to us to go deep within and understand that it is my spiritual job to see others through the eyes of Christ within. In another entry in her diary, she states, "In spite of everything, you always end up with the same conviction. Life is good after all. It's not God's fault that things go awry sometimes. The cause lies in ourselves. That's what stays with me even now. Even when I'm about to be packed off to Poland, with my family. Even though she was facing death, she still could see life as good, and she was at peace with God and her life. We are so fortunate in America. Even with all of our challenges, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to make our life and the lives of others, those less fortunate, good. We must come to that place of understanding that it is our collective consciousness that has created the way politics in America are today. To change our nation, we must be willing to change ourselves. It is our collective consciousness that will elect the next president of the United States. It is our collective consciousness that will elect our next representatives to Congress, our next state senator, our next city council person, and the list just continues. Will your vote and the votes of others be based on fear, or will it be based on love? Will it be based on duality or the oneness with God and each other? Will it be based on divine truth or what we think we know personally? Will your vote be for change and compromise so that all will win? Or will it be for staying in a system that is no longer working? We have tough decisions to make in the coming months. Let's pray daily for our nations, for our nation, for our leaders, and know that the divine truth is there for each vote that we cast. Let us lift our hearts, our minds in love, and see each other, regardless of our political beliefs, through the eyes of Christ that dwells within. After the last political election, after the last presidential election, a friend of mine put a scathing note on Facebook. He blocked everyone who supported Trump. He wanted nothing to do with them. He was angry, he was frustrated. Frankly, he was unable to see the Christ in another person. Actions like this will only continue to further divide our nation. What can each of us do to begin this day to heal our divide? What can you do to truly listen and hear without judgment what the other person has to say? My guess is that we will be sharing what they are afraid of if your side wins. Will your daily spiritual practice include prayers for our leaders, for our nation? We are all in this together, regardless of our political affiliation, regardless of who we choose to support or what we choose to believe. We are all one with the divine and with each other. Let us see the Christ in each of us. This is the truth in my life, and this is the truth in yours, and so it is.